All right. Pardon me, folks, while I get this figured out. I click this twice. Oh, that's on that screen. Got it. Okay. All right. I swear I've used a computer before. All right. Hey, folks. Thanks so much for joining me today for my talk. Talk a little bit about security operations and the lessons therein. Before I do that, I just want to kind of echo a lot about what Kyle said. I'm a huge believer in OWASP. OWASP has helped me in my career. A lot of the free resources that are offered out there, I think I'm a better engineer because of OWASP, and that's why I'm up here speaking. So, like Kyle said, I encourage anyone who wants to volunteer to do so, anyone who wants to speak, do so. And yeah, so let's get into it. Sorry for the picture. I'm really glad that we brought in food because that would have been really kind of annoying if I'm up here showing you pictures of beautiful tacos. But I didn't really think that I think the original idiom, which we all know what that it's in reference to, applies here, but I didn't want to lead my talk with that visual image. So you get tacos, really nice ones too. And due to the amount of cat herding and tactical diplomacy that's involved in my job, I think this would also be an appropriate title to my talk. Hey. All right. Also, since this is a story of transformation, naturally, we're going to start with some humble, not so graceful beginnings. But much like a proper postmortem following an incident, this will be completely blameless. It's not meant to cast anyone in a negative light. So let's begin with the trash talking, starting with me. Who am I? My name is Garrett Gross. I'm very happy to be here again. I'm a bad person, but I've learned that crime doesn't pay, as well as software. But I still think like a criminal. That's why I'm good at my job. What's the least amount of work that I can do to accomplish this goal? I am absolutely not the baddest cyber operator out there, but I understand the value of persistence, as do your attackers. Also, you know, kind of shows you a lot about the people that know everything when you walk in a room and just pretend that you don't know anything, or assume that you don't know anything. I've had some very cool jobs in my career. I've been very fortunate to work with a couple of people in this very room. My first job was I was a network engineer at a small Cisco reseller out of Las Vegas, where we were networking all the things in 1998. I've seen things that people have never seen probably since then. I've been a sysadmin, tech support rep, sales engineer, advisor to product teams. I was very proud to get a position as a principal engineer at Palo Alto on their cybersecurity team. Very proud of that. So proud that I left a month afterwards to go build a SOC. I don't know why I did that. And that's why I'm here to talk to you guys today. It's about building some SOCs. Not about socks like on my feet, but I'm a big fan of those as well. I'm also a dad, obviously, so like that's gonna exude in my presentation. Really bad jokes. I love building teams. Something that I've kind of figured out that I really love to do. And one of the smartest people that I know broke people down into two categories. Probably not the best start to smartest people you know, but he broke it down into builders and breakers. And I think I'm a little bit of both. While by trade, I gain unwanted access and break things, I think I'm equally as skilled at building teams and building people. I love teaching. I teach drums. I like to, like I said, I have a kiddo and I love nothing more than to teach her things. But with that being said, I also love to be taught. I'm always in learn mode. Like I said, you get a lot of success assuming that you know nothing about stuff. I have tried out for the Blue Man Group, but contractually, I can't say anything more about that. Now that we've gotten to know each other a little bit better, let's talk about the current state of security. It's not good, as we all know. Everyone here is in security. Whether it's the use of stolen credentials, phishing, misuse, or just making mistakes, people continue to play a very large role in incidents and breaches alike. The pessimist might say, well, you can't fix stupid. Stupid is forever. Or was that Ron White? I think Ron White said that. I see it as an opportunity to intervene in a large amount of potential breaches by leading with education. Enough feel good, though. This isn't a Tony Robbins talk. The vast majority of breaches only include a handful of steps, 3 actions. Phishing, dropper install, and ransomware deployment are what comprises the majority of attacks, but actually very few attacks have more than 5 steps. And our jobs as defenders is to increase this attack path, because your attacker is going to tend to avoid a longer attack chain, because every additional step is a chance for them to get caught, right? Ransomware increased 13% over the previous year, a jump greater than the past 5 years combined, which is absolutely hilarious, because I've been saying the same thing every single year. Ransomware continues to increase exponentially. You have to prepare for this. Please make considerations to do so. But again, it just keeps piling up. Why is this significant? Because with ransomware, threat actors don't need to do reconnaissance. They don't need to target you. They just need to get in. They don't need to find your crown jewels either. They just need to get in, encrypt your data, interrupt your business, and then get your attention. And that drastically decreases their chances of getting caught, because there's little to no involvement in your environment. Hell, ransomware groups don't even have to have in-house development. Ransomware as a service has been around for a very long time. So anyone with money, motivation, and the ability to transact on Tor can sling ransomware. You might say, but Garrett, you still need to know how to get in, target individuals with OSINT, get them to click a link, give up creds, and then maintain a network of command and control servers and financial components. But then I'd say that you're wrong, because every single one of those has been commoditized and is an offering today on the dark web. And not only are they there offering a really nice marketplace to go buy this stuff, but they've got about me sections and like customer testimonials now. I'm dead serious. Check this out. Hey, look at us. We're just a team of enterprising young cybersecurity enthusiasts just trying to help you be an asshole. And as much like ire as these folks have caused me, I can't really knock their hustle. It's just the complete lack of OPSEC that blows my mind. I'm like, what? Talking about their background, their trade craft. I mean, anyway, these guys are not masters in operational security, but that's okay. They probably write good ransomware. From one of the studies I'm referencing, the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report, which I implore all of you to read every single year. If you don't want to read the whole thing, the executive brief is very short. It's actually pretty digestible. They found that the number 1 and number 2 motivations were financial and espionage related, respectively. But I would counter that the espionage is likely in relation to furthering that financial gain. Always follow the money. That's another talk about U.S. diplomacy, but skip that. Just to show you how much money is in ransomware, though, 2020, your average initial ransomware demand was $489,000. Top demand was $3 million. Fast forward 12 months, that average initial ransom demand has now jumped to 2.2 million, and the top demand is 5.4 million. So I think it's safe to say that this is not going to go away or fix itself on its own. It's a very lucrative avenue for folks that, again, don't necessarily have to have a bunch of technical prowess to be good at their jobs. Oh, right, the supply chain too. That's another one that keeps creeping up. Breaches from Kaseya to SolarWinds, not to mention Log4j. It's Log4j, by the way. I'm going out on a limb. It's not Log4j, it's Log4j. Spread the word. You just have to remember that these vendor systems that you're putting all your stock in, they're just as likely to be an attack vector as your own. And much like ransomware, attacks on the supply chain are on the rise. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but these days, every company relies on software for their business to function, yet they don't think of themselves as technology companies, but that's its own kind of mental exercise I'll dive into. Can anyone here think of an example of a job where you don't use technology today? Get creative, like I'll entertain anything. Massage therapists don't use technology. What about to book their clients, maintain their books? PHI, that's PHI now. You're getting massages, could be considered like, PHI. Trust me, I went through this with my wife last night, and she gave me some of the most off-the-wall, bizarre, horrific examples of jobs, and we could not find one that either didn't use technology or couldn't benefit from one. So again, that supply chain, you just need to understand that access that you afford this software can and will be used against you or your organization or your customers, which is even worse. What blacksmiths? I mean, again, customer records, like learning new blacksmithing techniques by watching YouTube. I don't know. Again, it always comes back to your customer records. Like that's really the linchpin, is that can be used against you. And if you're not taking payment, securely. Go ahead. Boom. That's a really good point. If for some reason you are bucking the trend and you're not using Instagram, chances are you're not going to be able to compete with the folks that are. It's a great point. So what's the answer? What's the answer to the question of how do you defend against a team of hyper-vigilant, well-funded team of assholes? Well, the answer is comprehensive operational security. To everyone, to every question, that is the answer. But like anything, you can make security operations as complex as you like. But if we just look at the top 4, which I would argue are table stakes, that can be a daunting task for even a competent SecOps team to plan out, deploy, and maintain. So let's talk about what our reality is. Who do we have to manage all these capabilities? We're going to take a look at the security operations center of your dreams versus what we all know is reality for most of us. So we have our fantasy SOC. We've got, specialized staff to cover shifts, usually 24/7 with backups. Everyone's specialized. You've got a SOC manager, SOC engineer, analysts, incident responders, threat hunters, project management. You could just keep adding people here. Pen testers, malware analysts. The team is well funded, extremely well funded. It's driven by policy, and all security action flows through this team. They're effectively driving security awareness to the entire organization and likely having ramifications outside of that. And they're part of a greater security utopia. And there's likely other fleshed out areas within security, AppSec, security architecture, GRC, stuff like that. Keep in mind, these SOCs exist. My homeboys over AWS know what I'm talking about. I worked for Palo Alto. They had a SOC like that. But that's just not available to everyone on the planet. That is $6 million in annual FTEs alone. So just think about how you're going to pay for that. Everyone has the same problem, yet only a handful of people have access to really solve it. Didn't really seem accurate. So the more likely scenario is glorified guerrilla warfare. That's where I come into play, where we're reacting most of the time. So you've got limited staff, not enough people to cover 24/7. You're augmenting by managed services. No one is specialized. Everyone's wearing a bunch of different hats. Jack of all trades is starting to sound familiar. Little to no funding, constantly having to fight for attention, influence. Move my notes up for a sec. And policy, if it does exist, is either lacking in specificity or just is set it and forget it. It never gets updated. Oh, and by the way, you are security. You're not part of a greater utopia. You are that utopia, so you get to define that yourself. So, okay, I've set the stage. It's kind of where we're at. That's where the way I see things. Let's talk about my journey, why I'm here to talk about security operations. So as I mentioned, I was at Palo Alto, just really enjoying myself in a true security utopia. A good friend of mine, an overall extremely evolved human being, reached out to me and said, hey, my buddy and I just joined a company and we need to build out security from the ground up. Coming from the startup world, I was thinking like 7 folks in a broom closet. I was like, right on. But the reality was so much more interesting. What they had actually joined was a 15-year-old company in a turnaround mode where key investments were being made in order to reinvent the company. One of those key investments was security, and I was told it needed some work. What I walked into was what some would describe as a dumpster fire. Now is the time to remember the disclaimer that I gave out at the beginning of this talk. We had a security exec writing policy. You had IT handling some security with 2 dedicated people, about 1,500 employees, 20 offices, 10,000 endpoints across all those offices, remote work, data center, cloud assets. Any engineers in the room? Developers? R&D ran their own security. There wasn't much process, but there was a weird adherence to change management, which I thought was kind of weird. And I mean, whatever, it actually produced some challenges along the way, but little technology, which I found very surprising, but maybe not. There's a lot of people, but few people managing that. There was mostly Microsoft tooling, and I'm not giving Microsoft any shade whatsoever, but they're leveraging some pretty basic tooling. And you know, I give R&D grief, but actually they were doing some pretty amazing things. They're running vuln assessment. They had they're parsing logs for events and stuff. Great team, super talented, just not a lot of love from above. Probably my best business partners while I worked there was the DevOps team, which we'll get into why that's important here in a minute. Some of the other initial challenges that I had, there was no functional incident response. I'm not going to get into why that was important because I probably would get sued, but there was no security incident response team defined, which made it very hard to respond to security incidents. The incident response plan existed, but it wasn't actionable. It was just like a textbook. It had not been tested. There's no centralized control of infrastructure. Infra was just all over the place. I kept finding stuff like, I can't even give examples. It's so bad. But like, oh, I found this one thing that's responsible for this very crucial piece of business. And, that exists in a closet in, Sacramento or something. Again, R&D did what they please. This is not a knock on them. This is just giving you an example of kind of where we're at. They're broken up into cloistered groups. Some groups were very highly evolved. Some were not. At first, I thought this was just a lack of M&A hygiene. And then I thought started to think it was deliberate. Like, well, we're just going to organize this so they can act like little startups. But then I realized, much like other areas, this was just due to lack of planning, lack of investment, and lack of curation. And it was, again, just kind of a set it and forget it. This is comfortable. It's kind of working. So if it's not broke, don't fix it. It's the Texan coming out at me. Sorry about that. What's that? But it's not working. It's the perception. To break the fourth wall and kind of dive off on that, because I think it is important. One of the ways that I explained to folks is that when we came in, because remember, we came in the midst of a lot of people doing a lot of really good work, but I think they were operating off of inertia. And it was like they were on a Ferris wheel that the center spoke had come off, and I came by and stopped the Ferris wheel. And then everyone was like, oh my God, it didn't feel right. But what it was is they were about to fly off course. And if anyone here knows me and knows that I love to draw parallels, so I'm just going to stop myself now before we get into an entire discussion about carnies and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, suffice to say, yeah, exactly. They thought it was not broken to not fix it, but anyway, it was my job to come by and say it is in fact broke, and here's how we're going to fix it. Another challenge that I'll mention is that onboarding and offboarding was also in transition, which was good, because they recognized that there were some issues with that, but that kind of being fixed at the same time that security was being fixed. Again, not going to go into specifics, but it caused a lot of problems when we're trying to track user activity. By the way, love the comments, questions. Keep them coming. I don't care if you interrupt me or call me stupid. I love it. I actually went into this with the best intentions, even came up with a 30, 60, 90-day plan where I was going to meet people strategically, carefully, and methodically pore over existing policy and process, but quickly realized that I had no idea what I was doing. That's not true, and you know that, and you know that. Blissful ignorance probably would have been more excusable. I did know what I was doing. I just had no idea what I'd gotten myself into. So my approach, after a lot of soul searching and crying, was to scrap my 30, 60, 90-day plan and address the following in no particular order. Get initial visibility, develop a team, identify our existing security controls, then look into strategically policy, process, procedures, look at stuff related to incident response, vulnerability management, acceptable use, stuff like that, and then develop security's long-term strategy. We'll talk about why that's important. So let's talk about visibility. Let's first talk about the fact that I'm not on a vendor-sponsored talk, so I can literally do anything I want with slides. Look how horrible that is. But it's visible, right? Visibility, get it? It's huge. All right, anyway, told you dad jokes. So visibility, identify key assets and harden them. Identify where sensitive data was stored, IP, intellectual property, personally identifiable information, secrets, developers, domain controllers, our VIP-owned assets, C-levels, executives, assets owned by highly privileged users, and IT, R&D, security. We got EDR everywhere. This is a bit controversial. I actually walked into an existing vendor relationship, so I didn't have a choice of who we were using, but really even Defender is acceptable. And I will go on record saying that. Some would argue that it's even better than some paid for EDR. And we put it everywhere, like everywhere that touches the internet. Let me just say that. I put EDR in every box that touches the internet across 10,000 something endpoints. You can imagine what that cost. Was that the right approach? The vendor would say so. The dev team, not so much. We'll talk more on that later, but it's what we had at the time. And let me tell you, getting EDR on every endpoint saved our asses on a weekly basis. Like, didn't provide the best user experience, but allowed us to have a job to come to the next day, which is fantastic. Another step in visibility, I wanted to get an understanding of what assessments have been done in the past and where we needed intel. And I didn't dwell on the past of the mistakes, but I just want to see where we had gotten visibility in the past, where we were reporting, where are folks aware of issues that they need to fix. And then finally understand the status of product security, current controls, tooling that they're deploying, assessments they had done, integration with the SDLC, stuff like that. So then I moved on to people. Sounded that conch and assembled my tiger team of experienced engineers. By the way, this was pre-negotiated. So and yes, we're in a hiring craze right now, but let's pretend that we're not. Like, you may not always be able to walk into a job and say, I need to hire 3 extremely expensive people or 3 extremely experienced people, whatever, same thing. I knew that was going to be vital at the mission to hand, because I needed people to hit the ground running, not need any kind of oversight, and just kind of go and do their job and start to improve things. I then quickly drafted an org structure. It helped me understand where gaps are, but more importantly, helped me avoid the many hats problem, which, that kind of starts by someone saying, oh, I could do that. Oh, I could do that. Next thing you know, you've foregone 3 FTEs because Jeff over in accounting knows how to pen test. Like, what? Trust me. I mean, because, I'm really freely, or I'm up here freely admitting that I'm not the most business savvy individual. So I don't really consider those things a lot. But, if you let someone take your budget for FTEs, trust me, they will. All right, real important, we're here. Meet key people across the organization as soon as possible. I found that this may be obvious to some, but I found that forming authentic relationships with stakeholders is crucial to my success. When I first started doing this, I actually questioned my own authenticity. I thought I was being political, but I realized I wasn't being political. I was prioritizing the identification of the various perceptions of those around me. I made that more important to see what did they think of security. I'd find things out like, how has security made their job harder? How has security made their job easier? What policies do they have an issue with because they were inadequately explained to them? I was able to get ahead of problems and in most cases solve them before they became an issue. And it wasn't disingenuous. I was including these folks in future decisions, listening to their feedback and giving them a real voice in the direction of security. Another thing related to people, get company-wide comms on security out as soon as possible. And it's not fear, uncertainty, doubt, or reprimand, or I'm watching you, Kate, watching you shop on Amazon all the time. No, it's, educate. What is EDR and why should you not hate it? Hi, I understand the CEO has been texting you for Applebee's gift cards about that. You communicate out to folks what these problems are, and it gets ahead of a lot of the questions, because again, as technical people, we tend to assume a lot of things. If things aren't communicated effectively, and we'll talk about this here in a bit, but some people just spend their time kind of poking holes into security rather than trying to understand that. And then finally, people-wise, I wanted to understand access across the company. You could, I guess, put this in the visibility camp as well, but I think IAM is a people problem. People are creating access and managing that access. So understand what are all the access levels, who all has what, all the admins, domain admin, cloud services admin, yada, yada. How is access provisioned and revoked? How do we treat local machine access? Something that was very arduous, but actually netted me a lot of intelligence, was a complete enumeration of every single account. Every single account. Someone at Amazon is probably like, that's not possible. Maybe not, but maybe in a smaller business unit, you could crunch that. But some sort of maybe automated approach to going through that would be applicable as well. Better than nothing. So, because I get a lot of people saying in large organizations, "Oh, well, that'd be nice if I had 250 employees, but I can't do that with 40,000." Well, yes, you can. It just costs a lot more, and it's going to take a lot more time. But getting an enumeration of all your access is very important, no matter where you're at, especially if you find yourself in a similar situation where I'm coming in, not really knowing who's who in the zoo, getting a level set to kind of baseline my understanding of access. In addition to that, get a complete enumeration of every single application used across your environment. That is very hard to do unless you have like a CASB or something, right? Well, except for my friends over at Nudge, which not planned. I didn't know that Daniel was going to be here. But yeah, it's not sponsored. A friend of mine, her boss, reached out to me and said, "Hey man, I've got this really cool product. You want to check it out?" And I said, "Absolutely not. I've got way too many fish to fry." And he begged me and he pleaded, "Please tell Russ that I said he begged and pleaded me." No, what he was able to do is bring in a tool that I won't go into it, but uses metadata to basically crawl your email to see what you signed up for. So you can see what applications are in use in your environment. And it was amazing the amount of visibility that we got just in the one very specific piece that we used it for, which was to get an initial swag of what AWS accounts were out there. That in and of itself was worth the price of admission. So anyway, not trying to plug a tool here, but if you find yourself not being able to chew through a bunch of data like this, like my friends at AWS, where you couldn't go through all of AD, or like my friends at the company I worked for, where we absolutely could not go through and ask everyone what app you use, leverage technology. More on that later, but definitely look how you can leverage technology to solve these problems, because we're all technology companies. Last thing I'll say about people, security training is absolutely imperative, but it's completely useless if you just treat this as like a check the box type thing. More often than not, I see security training very milquetoast, very, asking very basic questions at the end of, some kind of video or whatever. What I like are the ones that actually check to see if you're paying attention, like what type of sandwich was Kate eating in the example? It would have been roast beef or something. I don't know. She didn't have a sandwich. Oh, look at you paying attention. My point being is the security training is often just kind of, hey, let's get through this so we can attest to it at the end of the year and make sure we're all on the same page. But prudent security awareness training that actually teaches people how to look for stuff, yes, sir. Where are the auditors all this time? Well, sure, but what are they auditing? They're auditing that just employees are going through a yearly compliance training. That's it. That's it. That's exactly the problem, is that when you, right. Well, but if you look at, and I am definitely not a GRC expert, but if you look at the majority of the compliance standards out there, they don't go into specifics about your security training. They just ask you, do you do this on a regular basis? Do new employees get training when they start? That's it. So it's on us to recognize that that's kind of a BS bar to measure ourselves against, and we need to be better. Because I'll tell you what, leading with education is the absolute best tool that you have in your arsenal. Like we could just end the talk now, like just educate all your people. That is the thing you need to spend your time and your money on. It's just that not everyone is as interested in security as we are. So we have to make it a little bit more compelling, a little bit more meaningful. Go ahead.
We talk about rolling EDR out everywhere. How do you know when you're done?
That's a great question. So first things, we tried to use the EDR technology for neighboring, which that was fraught with disaster because it was a lot of duplicates, a lot of getting the naming wrong. Without going into detail, we then compared it up against the population that we had in our different, asset definitions, in our hypervisor, in our cloud services, in our laptop, environment. But I'll tell you, getting that 100% coverage is very, very difficult. We found, and again, this is not a product talk, and I didn't mean for this to be, but like my buddies over at Rumble, I'm sure everyone's familiar with Metasploit. Okay. HD Moore, who invented Rumble, also invented a tool called, or invented Metasploit, also invented a tool called Rumble, which is like Nmap on steroids. It uses some very cool technology to go basically ask like one of the cool things it does, ARP who is, like, hey, what's your ARP address? And by the way, what's the ARP address of your neighbor? And it uses this to kind of build an understanding of your assets. So that unbelievably complex technology, even that was not good enough for us to get a complete picture of our assets because we weren't being fastidious about tracking our assets. And that's the answer to that question is it's up to you. What's that? I wasn't covering my ass. Yeah, no, but true. That's kind of hard to do. I mean, imagine you go buy a company and they're like, cool, so let's get EDR on all your laptops. Let's give you a list of all of our laptops. Well, we don't have a list of all the laptops. Well, what do? You email every single person in the company that you just acquired and you meet with them one-to-one. There's like literally no other way. So that's a problem that doesn't really have a solution. You have to cover your assets. If you don't have an understanding of your assets, you go get an understanding of your assets. You go define a network access, and then profile the devices that come on the network. If they don't have EDR, they don't get accepted in the network. There's a lot of different ways to approach that, but that's a problem that we struggled with, to be quite honest. So does that help? Okay, cool. All right, so moving on. I need to ID existing security controls. So I came up with my own list of cybersecurity that's the NIST cybersecurity framework: identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. Everyone knows that by heart. I go to sleep singing that mantra to myself at night. But what I did is I used that to kind of understand what tools were out there, what tools do we need, because as we'll talk about, the vendor landscape is large and voluminous. But I won't go through the list that I have spelled out here, but I went through each of these. Identify, for example, what type of asset intelligence did we have? What we found is that we needed to leverage tools that look at attack surface management, tools like Sevco or Jupiter One that will actually correlate and aggregate these assets, build relationships, and then help me understand where my shadow IT is. Protection, hardening stuff, antivirus, SSO, MFA. We'll go into that, why that was a really easy, quick win. Detecting, pretty self-explanatory there. You have whatever DR, EDR, XDR, FDR, 9DR, whatever is next. Get one of those DRs out there. SIM, kind of hard to run in a small team, but I think detection response is coming around to maybe clip SIM out of the equation, but I'm not a SIM expert anymore. So responding, your IR platform I found was probably our biggest asset there. And we'll talk about that, but employees' ability to report incidents, and then our ability to respond out to those users to say, Gesundheit, to say, hey, we've received your incident. This is what we're doing about it. And then recovery, backups, your backups validated and tested. You have business continuity, disaster recovery plans. You have cyber insurance. The point of all this is that, again, this helped me kind of guide what was missing and help prioritize my efforts in regards to tooling, because I wanted to stay away from solving problems with tools, but, or rather inventing problems with tools, inventing problems solved with tools. But anyway, that helped me kind of guide myself through that landscape, because it is very confusing, because as we'll talk about, every vendor has a different way of solving a security problem. Next up, I looked at security policy, process, and procedures. Again, talked about this earlier. How are incidents reported? Who is responding? When and how do we communicate internally? What about externally? What if we have an incident that involves our customers? What does our vulnerability management standard look like? When I walked in, we had no internal SLAs on addressing vulns, so we fixed that very quickly. We actually had no, we had a very weird definition around acceptable use. I'll say that, but previous leadership had a pretty lax approach. So kind of enforcing, hey, these are for business use. Here's what you can and cannot use them for is very important to us, because, I'm a firm believer in having a reference that you can point people to say, hey, this is why you cannot do this, not just because I said so. So developing this policy that's actually robust, it's actually readable, and not a complete, mind-numbing experience to digest, I think is important. Okay, my vision, I wanted to think or rethink about what the primary purpose of security operations was. So incident response, again, we talked about this, provide a means for users to report incidents. provide incident handling assistance to users, detection and response. As a security operations team, we'd be able to build process to identify potentially malicious activity. A vulnerability assessment, assess infrastructure in a way that doesn't interrupt business. That's a real big thing here, because especially when you're dealing with engineering teams, you're asking to take systems offline, or you're asking for a little bit of their time to do your job. So just realize that. But when you're, and I could spend a whole hour talking about vulnerability assessment and reporting, but when you're reporting to those folks what's wrong, give them examples of why this is an issue. Give them an example of what fixed looks like, but don't dictate how to fix it. And that's the real delicate balance, I think. But speak their language and meet them where they are. Don't make them log into your security tools. Like, no one but us likes the black background with dark gray text. Like, trust me. Reassess. I had to reassess my objectives, and your mileage may vary here, but for me, I knew that I had to A, stop the bleeding, B, set up a team, C, build a security stack, and then start to look at expanding our security proof. And then second to last, need to look at our definitions of success. And this is very, very important to the kind of the business of security, something that I don't often think of, but what this allows you to do, and before I get into that, start small and iterate. Don't try to boil the ocean. Complete your rollout of EDR like you're talking about. At least get to, here's how we're getting to 100%. Develop, a functioning tested incident response. Develop the ability to demonstrate reduction of risk, and then demonstrate reduction of risk. The point is, break this up into manageable chunks so that you can capture this and then communicate your progress on these initiatives externally, because that's a big component of this. Not only does it help you track your efforts, but it also helps you understand if your definition of success aligns with others' definitions of success. And that can get you out in front of a lot of uncomfortable situations or conversations down the road. Lastly, on this piece, I want to look at the evolution of security operations. I wanted to centralize incident response across the entire company. I wanted to centralize infrastructure management, have more of a catalog-based, service delivery offering, and then of course, more automation, because the more we can automate repeated tasks, the better. Okay, so some of the struggles along the way. This is where we get into the fun part of the talk. Hiring, we talked about this earlier. You're hiring for every job imaginable, and yet we can't find people. Some people actually don't have budget for this. We were very lucky in the fact that we were actually pretty well funded, but we still struggle to find people. I don't know about you, large amount of unqualified applicants, like alarmingly large amount of people that didn't even read the job description, which sometimes, work with a recruiter to help fix that. Speaking of, I actually recommend working with a recruiter. Internal, external, doesn't matter. If it's internal, they better be amazing though, because those external services are actually pretty phenomenal. This is my own personal opinion, but I would say, augment staff with outsourcing, but be prepared to pay. Cheap talent is not worth it. You're not going to find a bargain IR retainer out there, and if you do, don't pay for it. We ran into a lot of distrust of security, and I'll admit that we did come in a little hot. Super nice and diplomatic, but we came in with a lot. We came in with like, hey, the world's on fire and we need your help fixing it. So naturally they saw us as an impediment, kind of telling them how to do their jobs, and they'd spend most of their time just poking holes into our security controls and reports instead of fixing stuff. There's a complete lack of security awareness. And not sure how much detail I can go in here, but some of the things people did had you question whether or not they were actively working against you. And one of the things that I have to remember, having worked for a lot of security vendors, is that not everyone understands security the way that we do. So we have to make it accessible for folks. But even then, just like a complete willful ignorance of security is just not acceptable. And to your point, education, prudent education, I think is the solution to that. We had terrible IT architecture, and again, the disclaimer, this is no one person's fault, but we had business critical systems running on over allocated systems. We had and I don't want to go into specifics, but very, very minimal controls in some areas. We had backups in the same physical location as our hypervisor. That's common. Laptops, desktops used to serve content. It was nuts. It was nuts. So you know what I'm saying. It was just, it's as if I was a state actor and I was like, I'm going to design a messed up network for you here. Let me figure this out. But again, you have to realize that they just don't stare through the same lens as we do. And again, that helpful education, I think, just goes very long. So anyway, R&D, again, it was its own kind of dumpster fire. Anyone could create infrastructure at one time. We fixed that. We were getting boxes popped for very, very silly reasons. And on top of all that, we're kind of sitting there scrambling, trying to figure out what to do. On top of that, we have to deal with this. And this, as someone who has worked for security vendors, who works for one now, I can tell you this is a real problem. And I will say, to plug the vendor that I work for, we actually do put our money where our mouth is. We do lead with education. We are not salesy. We don't sell you on things, but still, we're going to prescribe a way to fix problems. And you, not you in the room, but you as security professionals, you may or may not know if that's the right answer. So do you trust the vendor? Do you trust the vendor network? I'm not going to call it any names, but there's like literally a prescribed school of thought that tells you to go buy like 4 different vendors' tools. Like, it's bizarre. They all want to buy you lunch. That's right. Or dinner. The key there is you ask them, if you're going to buy me dinner, do you promise to be quiet the entire time? And again, what sales is sales. It's very necessary. It's very, marketing is real. But what I mean is more often than not, they're trying to I hear that they're trying to convince me that their approach is the right one, rather than listen to my problem and see if their solution marries with mine. Also, support sucks. I'll say it. Support sucks. I've been in support. I use support today. Support is just a very unneglected side of almost every organization out there. And as a security team trying to, fight the good fight, dealing with a vendor that was just ridiculous was absolutely an impediment, and lots of sleepless nights trying to figure that one out. But as much as I want to, I won't call them out. Some other struggles: security questionnaires from sales. Oh my God. The prior head of security must have done nothing but this. Because when I came in, there was like 80 sales questionnaires in the queue at all times. We put out a realistic SLA of 15 to 20 business days to complete these. That is 1 month, just so everyone's clear, because it would take us that long. That had to fix itself. We had to rely on other folks to deal with that. Our organization was targeted. I definitely won't go into that, but we were hot. Gave a new meaning to persistent threats, let me tell you. We had a pushback from the business, and not from the money people. It was mostly from the dev teams. Again, kind of telling us that our approach was wrong. This was making their jobs harder. You're not looking for the right things, stuff like that, instead of having, kind of impact-driven discussions with us to try to figure out what we're all working towards. It was hard to work with. Things were in different languages, and I'm talking about account names, identity containers, documentation. It slowed down every process. And it's not like they had just started doing business in the States. This was many, many, many years later, and we would miss stuff because we weren't looking for it in the right language. It was just maddening to deal with. And unfortunately, I'm a dumb what is it, monoglot, and I only speak English. So I was just, what's that? I speak printer natively. We also had a lot of after effects of bad M&A, multiple domains, domain trust relationships, many cloud services accounts, secondary messaging apps, groups. Basically had like secondary and tertiary companies inside our company. Again, localization issues, and then missing asset records. So to kind of take a positive spin, some of the quick wins we had along the way. Everybody? Okay, cool, awesome. We're all no Celtics fans. Excellent. SSO and MFA. Holy crap, that is like step one. SSO and MFA. We walked in, we had SSO and MFA, and we weren't using it, which was like blowing my mind. So we got SSO and MFA anywhere or everywhere. Again, you don't have to go out and get the baddest solution out there. Just use something. Yeah, I mean, anything, everything has some type of secondary factor of authentication now. EDR, again, I'll sing its praises. You know, as soon as we kind of figured out how to auto provision it, it became a real easy force multiplier. Aggregating control of the infrastructure. Quick tip that I learned: use finance to control this. Just go to accounts payable, or I don't even know which one it is, AP or AR. Go to the finance people and say, if someone comes to you and wants to expense a cloud service account, make them come to me first. Shuts that off at the sieve real quick. Anything has to go through me. Yeah, that was actually a really big win because again, we had a bunch of different disparate teams and they were all out there expensing their own cloud services accounts and other applications and stuff. So you just shut that off at the source. That's right. Predefined security controls and cloud services is a really big one. And one that if you're running DevOps should be well within your wheelhouse. Build and maintain known good images. Build some type of menu-based security group creation. Instead of allowing anyone to roll their own, have them pick through a menu of what you prescribe for access. And the last one was a quick win for us was Agile. And we started that about 6 months in. I'm not a developer. In fact, I write the world's worst Python ever. I'd never done Agile before. I'd certainly heard of it, but it absolutely helped us incredibly. My recommendation here is to hire someone to do this if you can. If you've never done it before, there you go, read a book before you dive right into it. But and also don't do this right out of the gate if you literally didn't do this in your last job. Because we kind of started to do that. And the reason I'm saying this is because I tried to be the Scrum Master. And let's just say that blew up in my face. I had no idea what I was doing. But once we actually hired someone who had done this at a job prior, she was amazing. She like just, it was like a magic wand across everything. And all of a sudden we had issue tracking. We had a month's worth of work that we were planning for. We could predict it. We could communicate externally. Agile. Very good idea for security teams. And again, if I'm in the minority for thinking this is a new thing, whatever, I've been wrong before once. So some lessons learned. This is kind of the last end of the presentation. So feel free to speak up, chime in if you want. Here's where I invest in this order. People. Hire the right people first. You might be that right person. So don't go into an organization thinking, oh, I've got to hire 4 new people. You might have been that strategic hire. Again, outsource if you need to, but build out a plan to self-sustainability, even if it's 3 or 4 years in the future. I'm not a fan of relying on external sources at all times. I think they can be definitely leveraged effectively, but just to have that as your plan into perpetuity, I'm not sure that really promotes growth. Build on process, identify what you're missing and build that. I know that's obvious, but the message here is don't do it halfway. Checking the box is stupid as hell and it will 100% blow up in your face. So don't just say, hey, we have an incident response process because Dave went out and downloaded a PDF off of whatever. Technology. Lastly, apply technology to solve problems that you've identified. Like I garbled earlier, don't use technology to find problems to solve. A lot of vendors will kind of goad you into that direction. That's the wrong thing to do. Special mention, SOAR, security orchestration automation response is great, but don't lead with that. And again, your mileage may vary. If you're a dev team that's doing security and you start out and you just write code in your sleep, okay, well then maybe that's advantageous for you. But for someone like myself who has to reference things to write code, that's not going to be something that I lead. And not all speaking bad about automation, just don't lead with it. And to that end, here's an example of a great automation with some stellar Google slide animation work, if I do say so myself. So real quick, so we find a vulnerability. We ran a vuln scan. We find a new asset. It's a rogue database with a critical 0-day vulnerability. Automatically, just based on the score of that finding, the SIM tagged the asset as a suspicious asset, adds it to a special group of restricted assets that has a little bit more purview and visibility onto it. A service ticket is automatically created, assigned to our CloudOps team for them to remediate the vulnerability. All that happened in 0.3 seconds. And then here's at the point where we actually get some human intervention. Analyst logs into the SIM. Here's the alert. We've got all the context that we already need to deal with the situation. And actually what they found, they're looking at like asset ownership, sensitivity level and stuff like that, look for any related activity. I actually found this box was in communication with a command and control server, quarantined the hosts, rotated the creds on the box, and then they create a service ticket to IT saying all user accounts logged into that box for a period of time have those creds rotated as well. Once that ticket is closed, saying that the creds have been rotated, the analyst is then notified, indicating that the patch has been applied, the fix of the O-day has been applied. Analysts can then run a targeted scan against that single box to validate the host was updated. And all of this took, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes or so. Maybe 6 months prior to our organization, this would have taken, I don't know, 2 days of emails or Slacks, or maybe they didn't notice this connection between the two assets. So again, this was something that was set up and run by one person. So I didn't click my awesome navigation, whatever. This was all run by one person. So I'm kind of setting the stage, like automation can be very advantageous. Strategic things that you notice you're automating all the time. Another example would be validating intent. You get an alert that Kate Brew has, she absolutely did, trust me, the most dangerous person I've ever met. Kate Brew has run an executable on her machine. Okay, well, what I would do there is I'd Slack Kate. I'd be like, hey, Kate, is this you running Assassin's Creed crack.exe or whatever? And then Kate's going to go, oh, shit. Yeah, no, that is me. I'm really sorry about that. And I'll go, okay, let's not do that. Remember, you have a little coaching session. But if it wasn't Kate and someone has actually, disguised some malware as a crack or something like that, something I absolutely would do, I can validate that intent and I can move to take additional steps very quickly. Well, what if I can just use a Slack bot for that? I can just send a Slack bot message out to you, say, hi, insert name here. I noticed that you've done insert thing here. Is this you? Click yes or no. And then that automates that validation intent. That way I don't have to do it. I get intel immediately. You can do that from your phone. Doesn't have to be. So again, automation, very advantageous. I don't want to be known as the person who speaks against it, but as someone who doesn't necessarily lead with that, it would have been an impediment for us. Okay, I'll power through the last of this. I know I'm short on time here. Every company seems to have the same challenges. I've only worked for a handful of companies, but I'd see themes across them. I spoke about this earlier. Every company is a software company. So often it gets attributed to Satya Nadella, a Microsoft guy. He didn't say it. It was a Forbes journalist talking about this industrial giant in the area was losing steam due to ignoring data coming out of independent data collectors. In this example, it was users driving around plants with gas detection devices, reporting methane leakage. Okay, what they didn't anticipate was that the user community's ability to gather data, process it, and then communicate their own findings was better than this industrial giant. And of course, they were ignoring these findings, customer confidence tanked, yada, yada, yada. The point was that your company has to, using technology, become as responsive and as agile as your customers, and then remain as aggressive as they are by measuring, monitoring, evaluating, and responding to data about your products and services and their impact on society. Basically, understand your users are going to be able to gather data and use it against you better than you ever could because social media, because the ubiquity of compute networks. Another example came from Twitter founder Jack Dorsey, where he's, back in the day, he was like, listen, I can release a feature and get feedback immediately and voluminous amounts of feedback. So again, I know this is not a new lesson to learn. I think this article was written in 2011, but every technology needs to understand that they're at the mercy of software. Use this technology. So you can draw a parallel to security. I'm not here to talk about methane leakage. Every company, regardless of its size, industry, location, et cetera, must embrace the concept of comprehensive security. Okay, that's obvious, right? And this is bolstered in a lot of way by laws, compliance, stuff like that. But most organizations just do the bare minimum. So I'd say that they just haven't been breached yet, which is sad because as Kate and Danielle and I have seen, the response to the breach is often an overreach and immeasurable amounts more than the initial investment. Tons of studies on that, not the right talk, but building on that notion, every organization needs to assume that threat actors are more sophisticated than they are, so use their data against them. Be intentional about collecting and analyzing data in your environment. Look for deviations in behavior, or work with vendors that do. Troll dark websites for intel. Not recommending that you do this, but there are vendors when I work for will do this for you. Reverse engineering malware gives you a ton of information about intent, but also the criminal organization behind the attack. Again, I don't recommend that you reverse engineer malware, but maybe work with a vendor that does. Deploying honeypots. So internally, you can also use this lesson to gather your users' effects of security. Use surveys, report on your findings, and then do something about it. Like you notice that your EDR is causing problems with a certain program that your developers are using. Recognize that and then fix that quickly. That will aid in your success of your overall goals here. Finally, understand that the security of your company, the security of the software companies whose tools you use directly affects you as well. I harped on this earlier on in the conversation. I'm going to harp on it again. Just like SolarWinds, Kaseya, other supply chain attacks, what else? CodeCov, LastPass. It will continue to go on. So have a plan for when these vendors get breached, not if they do. Nobody talks, despite this working 0 of 10 times, siloed organizations tend to work in silos. You need to discuss your motivations behind the initiatives that want to take place. Like, I'll speed through this. I don't want to give too much detail, but like, why not use RDP? Okay. Instead of it's against policy and it's easily abused, explain an RDP exploit to someone. If you have someone who is technical enough to push back on why they should be able to use remote desktop, they should be able to understand a remote desktop exploit. So again, assume that they will understand this. If they don't, well, then use that as an opportunity to really get down the weeds. Can anyone think of a cool RDP exploit that you want to explain? It'd be pretty easy. Multiple pipes, pretty easy one. RDP uses pipes to communicate. You can create duplicate pipes. I can create it. Well, before there's a CVE this year, you could predict the syntax of a pipe. So I could create a pipe. I could just wait for Kate Brew to come and use RDP, and then I could just basically manually attack. So that type of interaction is very easily explained to someone who has a technical proclivity. So again, assume that they can have this conversation with you. EDR everywhere was a blessing and a curse. Stopped a ton of attacks, produced a ton of work. Like I said, dealing with the vendor, especially earlier on, was an absolute nightmare. So prepare for that. And not trying to perpetuate this, inherent trust between product engineering and security, but if you're not aligned top down that security is part of your cost of goods sold, you can assume that your engineering teams are going to cut corners in that regard. If you're not aligned with your partners in product, that to be secure in what you want the product to do, it will cost you X, and that cost is factored into the plan. You just have to get down to that specificity in my experience. Finally, last point, second to last slide, defensibility is key. And this is the core tenet that I live my life by, I think, not just security, just like how I operate as a human. You're not going to be able to make the right choice that solves the issue and produces the desired effect every single time. It's just not possible. You can, however, create processes that allow you to make the right decision given the information available at that point in time. The unfortunate truth is this actually doesn't decrease the likelihood that you're going to make the wrong decision, but it will decrease the time it takes for you to get to the right decision. As an aside, any good incident responder would know making a wrong decision is better than making no decision for the reasons stated above. That's all the time I got, folks. I'm a couple minutes over, but I definitely want to entertain any questions if we have any.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? We're over time.
In the back.
She's got questions.
Would you do it again?
No, would I
Building a sock.
would I build a sock again? Yeah, I mean, I look back on the last 11 months and I'm very proud of what we accomplished. You know, I got another opportunity to go build another team somewhere else. And so I did have some regrets, maybe not regrets, but you know, some, am I doing the right thing? But absolutely, it was, learned a whole bunch about business. I learned a whole bunch about working with other people. I learned a whole bunch about myself, about how I compartmentalize stress. But no, I absolutely would do it again. It's a great group of people, and they're still out there fighting the good fight without me. So, yeah, great question.
So we have some from online, from Ralph Lauren.
Ralph
Building
Lauren,
a yes.
love your pants.
Building a security program from the ground up has a never-ending amount of work. Can you share your approach on how to project out milestones, build roadmaps, and how much agility do you bake into it?
Yeah. So at first we were shooting from the hip. We were we didn't know who's who in the zoo. So we were literally just fighting fires and, you know, bobbing and weaving, as I like to call it. The agile methodology really helped, but before that, it was just writing stuff down in Jira. And I mean, really, like like I said, I tried to be a Scrum Master and failed miserably, but just writing down initiatives in Jira, that helped us track issues and then evolve that. So I guess that's the lesson learned, is just evolve it. Start small and evolve. Write down the stuff that you're doing, communicate that externally. And I would say probably the biggest lesson, or the biggest win you can have there, is set a delivery date for yourself and stick to it. And if you don't meet it, don't change it. Explain why you didn't make it, and then iterate from there. So good project management 101, which I literally know nothing about, but.
Okay, the other question is, security deals with a level of uncertainty that most of society aren't exposed to. Pessimism can take over individuals and or teams that tends to destroy morale and have a negative effect on performance. Can you share some of the ways that you deal with that from both a personal level and from managing teams through the pessimism?
Drinking, mostly. No, you know, that's a really great question. And I actually, I do like the occasional drink, but I actually can't drink that much. Just can't. Anyway, I would say that when you call the fire department to a building on fire, it's not an emergency to them. They show up and they're ready to go. And they're not freaking out. They're not crying. They're not, you know, like what I would be doing if my house was on fire, being a ball, going, oh, why me? So I think that the key there is running people through scenario-based training, getting them accustomed to that stress, erring on the side of caution. And when you do have a false positive incident response, follow through with it and actually take that training. You've already woken everyone up, or you've already gotten everyone freaked out. Like, you might as well use it as a training exercise, because there is no way to get used to people shooting at you other than to get shot at. What I mean by that is, like, you're not going to get used to fielding these events without just getting in there and dealing with them. So I think the answer that I would give you, because it's not an easy one to answer, because security is very pessimistic, because the world is on fire. It's terrible. Security is an illusion. Oh God, I gotta stop myself. I think going through those scenarios are very important to folks. Again, allows you to measure yourself in a non firefight type environment. But yeah, communication, probably taking pulse checks with your team, seeing how everyone's mental health is doing. I think mental health is a very commonly overlooked issue in tech, especially with men, unfortunately. So I'd say that keeping tabs on everyone's mental health and kind of asking everyone how they're doing on a regular basis is very important. Yes. Great question. Great question, by the way. Thank you, Nathan and Ralph, for your time.
I got a question about vendors. So this is something I found, and I just want to hear your thoughts on it and see if you have any solutions that you've thought of. Is you have to kind of pick one. Do you want best in breed for everything, or do you want it all in one stack from one person that's easy to manage? I found that's been the question that I've always had to try and answer. Like, do I really want stuff that's the best, or do I just want good enough and it's easy to manage because it all comes from the same person?
Are you wearing a wire?
No.
God. I mean, it depends on who you're working with, I suppose. Because if you're a small, scrappy team and you don't have time to do a bunch of context switching, I think the as much as I hate this phrase, the single pane of glass is probably advantageous to you. But I wouldn't sacrifice good analysis for the sake of having things in one place. I'll give you an example. I won't name them, but it'll be pretty easy to guess. There's an EDR vendor out there that is so good at EDR, it's like scary. Like they are one of the best out there. It's the one that we use at the place that I was at. Not Toys R Us, if anyone's asking. It's a different story. They started going into the CSPM and CWPP space, the cloud security posture management, cloud workload protection, cloud security. Their cloud security offering was terrible. Like so bad that it missed stuff. Like it missed a lot of stuff. Like we had that as an incumbent detection agent. And we had the dev team evaluate another solution, and that solution found a bunch of stuff that this thing hadn't found. So it was like, what? But we had been sold on that time, context switching, you want to be in the single pane of glass, but at the concession of shitty detection, it wasn't worth it so to answer your question, I would probably go with best in breed first, and I would make accommodations around that with code or process. Because again, I'd much rather have to spend time looking at a different system than miss something because I had to buy, Globo Corp's cloud detection agent when all they do is, firewalls. Any other questions?
Alrighty.
Anything else
I
online?
think we are actually out of time.
Out of time,
So yeah,
awesome.
we're a few bit over, but thank you, Garrett. This has been great. I think you might be sticking around for longer.
Thanks so much.
And that is all for the OWASP Austin chapter meeting for July, and hope to see you all next month. And we will be in person again here tonight. So thanks, everybody.
Woo.
Bye.
Nice. Yeah, I tend to go over. Sorry.